So again, my name is Daniel Grimberg. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Film and Media Studies here at UCSB. And some of the things that I study are the war on terror, Guantanamo, drone warfare, and lately I've been writing about this film. So it's really my privilege to get to introduce the producer and director of National Bird, Sonia Kennebeck. Just a little bit about her. She is an investigative journalist. She got a master's in international affairs. She worked for many, many years producing television documentaries for German public television. And I think all of those experiences really speak to her expertise and her preparation for making this film, which is a very difficult film to make for multiple reasons, some of which we'll get into. But particularly thinking about all the different scales of drone warfare, all the different perspectives, all the different scales, and I think her experiences and her background, which isn't maybe traditional for a documentarian, have really equipped her to tell this story so effectively. And fortuitously today, her new op doc is on the front page of the New York Times. It's called From Journalist to Hostage, thinking about a journalist who was taken hostage in Afghanistan. And I was waiting to interview her earlier today, and I was just looking at the New York Times, and there it appeared. So I highly recommend everyone read what she wrote and watch the documentary as well. It speaks a lot to the risks and the challenges of making critical, independent documentaries about national security, about issues that are still confidential and classified. And I think it gives another perspective to why it's so important to tell those kinds of stories. So by way of bio, I would also add that Sonia Kennebeck is someone who is taking chances that we need to be taking. She's assuming risks. As an independent documentarian, those risks are financial, they're legal, they're taking risks with needing to secure your technology, with protecting your sources. And for so many people, that's not a challenge they're willing to take on. But amid this moment of vast government opacity, of secret programs, we need people like Sonia to tell these stories and tell them in compelling, striking ways that capture audiences' attention. So I'd like to begin just by asking, what initially drove you to pursue such a complicated and challenging topic?
Thanks for this really kind introduction. And I also want to encourage everyone to, be courageous. I think the whistleblowers in this film are the most courageous, and the people in Afghanistan, of course, who decided to go openly in front of the camera and share their stories with us, and just be so open about their experiences. And I think we as journalists and filmmakers should not have less courage than them. And I think in our societies, we are increasingly, or I see it too. People are increasingly self-censoring, and I think that's a big risk. So I think we should all be courageous and support each other, and in speaking out loudly and strongly for democracy and for a free press and free speech. And so when I started with the research in early 2013, there was so little information out about the drone program, and it was really just curiosity at the beginning. I wanted to know more about it because it just it seemed like a weapon, like directly out of a sci-fi film, and the first reported drone strike was. There are different reports, but I think The Atlantic says the first reported drone strike was in late 2001. And so by 2013, there was still so little information out in the public. And it just, I was wondering why was there so much secrecy around, such a, transformational weapon in warfare. And so I really wanted to, get information from the people directly impacted, the people who worked in the program and the people in the target countries. And that was my idea. So I really started with an issue, a topic, and then I went out and tried to find the sources, which was not easy because the three whistleblowers in National Bird all had top secret clearance. Daniel still had top secret clearance when we started filming. And and I did a lot of field research. I went out to veterans conventions and peace protests, and did a lot of like internet research and talking to people who I knew in the veterans community to find these sources and tell me their side of the story, because the public side, the government side, I thought was very well represented in the media.
Since we're starting to get into this area, what were some of the biggest challenges you encountered along the way?
The first challenge was really to find people who were willing to speak, because it meant a risk, and I actually discussed it early on with them that I will try to minimize the risk, and I used my first development money for the film to hire a First Amendment attorney, and so I knew this was a high risk project, and I tried to minimize it as much as possible, but I told my subjects that there is still going to be a risk, and they have to decide if they want to speak out. And so finding people who wanted to share their stories was a big part of it. The research is substantial for an issue like this. And and then the second part is, of course, like throughout the production to secure the project. So I was working with attorneys, with a whistleblower attorney, First Amendment attorney. Daniel was raided in the middle of the production. It's actually the raid. It's I always see this film as two parts. So the first part is really a lot of explanation, insight into the drone program, because I started realizing during my research that a lot of people really didn't have too much knowledge about what drones are, how big they are, how they work, how the program works, and I think it's partly because of the public narrative was surgical strikes, precision weapons, all this terminology that just sounds like you are very specifically targeting one person. So I still see get the feedback at screenings. People say, yeah, actually, they carry big weapons and bombs. I thought, I envisioned something different. Mm-hmm. So it was really important for me to explain the program and, also have the Obama sound bites to show that side of the story, and then the surveillance system behind the drones, what Lisa was working on. I think that's really important, because that is, the DGS is actually a weapons system itself. And it can suck up all of this data, and you can connect different weapons to it. Semi-autonomous weapons, autonomous weapons in the future. They are all part of the same gigantic global surveillance system. And so that was important for me to explain. And then the second risky part, of course, was traveling to Afghanistan.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because it is such a powerful part of this film. What kinds of security measures and precautions do you take in relation to that part of the filming?
Well, we try to prepare as much as possible. When I say we, it was a very small production team that made this film. And the credits are always long because post-production requires a lot of people, but the core team was really my production partner, Ines Hofmann-Kanner, my director of photography, very important part of the team, Torsten Lapp. Torsten and me, we traveled to Afghanistan together, the two of us. I'm also the sound technician, and the editor Maxine Gödecke, and the composer Insa Rudolph. And so 5 people were, the core team. And so, before Torsten and I went, we inquired about, and I speak about that in my article in New York Times Op Docs, we inquired about kidnapping insurance. And it was around $20,000 for the two of us, and we just couldn't afford it. And so we decided to have health insurance, and with Reporters Without Borders, very, very good crisis area health insurance, and they fly you out in case of of any emergencies, and then I really tried to research the people who we were working with, vet them, make sure that we would be as safe as possible. But of course, there's a risk if you go into a country like that. But I think it was essential for this film because almost 30% of the film actually takes place in Afghanistan, and the impact in these countries, and I hope it comes across. It's not just the bomb, but it's the threat. It's being under constant surveillance, knowing that you can be bombed, and children being afraid of the skies, and it really changes as society in these countries.
So many of the people that we see in the film are vulnerable in multiple ways. What is it like working with people who are psychologically, physically, legally vulnerable?
That also requires, I think, a lot of thought and preparation. I started this year to give source protection workshops, where a lot of people who have come up to me to ask about how do you protect a team or a project like this. They usually think about operational security, meaning encryption, secure phone calls, encrypting material and all that, which I think is essential and very important, and not just for the director and the producer, but the entire team should know how to encrypt material. And I think journalists and filmmakers have to become more sophisticated and ideally spread it to everyone else, because the more people use it, the more chatter is out there. So you're not targeted if the individual people who are using it, but it's important for everyone. I think everyone needs privacy and secrets as well. And so operational security and then legal protection, but I also included trauma protection, and which means how do you have best practices during interviews. Of course, you want to have the information, but you also want people to not be re-traumatized, and make sure they are well after an interview. That's one of the things that I think about. Like I prepare my subjects beforehand and tell them, this is going to be very emotional. They often say, hey, I've talked about this before, but I usually warn them that I ask questions that family members don't ask, or friends and family wouldn't bring up. So I think that's important to prepare people beforehand, and then to make sure that they are okay afterwards, that they are with family or friends, or sometimes my director of photography and me would spend a lot of time with them afterwards, have dinner, and just kind of have a try to have a safe environment. And then you also have to think about yourself and your team, because making films like this, and most documentaries that I've seen are, social issue documentaries. You work with people who have experienced trauma. So I think you have to put a lot of thought into the subjects in front of the camera, but also on yourself and your team, because people can also, journalists and filmmakers can become traumatized.
Yeah, we see a trace of that in the film when Heather says, people think I'm just doing this for myself, but every time I talk about it, it just dredges up all these things all over again. So we even see it in the film, how raw it still is for her. I wanted to switch for a moment from production to thinking about the aesthetics of the film. There are lots of fascinating techniques that you use, and I think the range of techniques really helps sell the scale and the complexity of drone warfare. But one of the more affecting and disconcerting choices you made was the aerial shots. So I wondered if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Before I did the aerial shots, I was thinking a long time, can I do it? It's very intrusive. But I think for a film like this, it makes a lot of sense, because I really wanted audiences in the Western world to have a sense of how it is to live under drones, under this constant surveillance. And the feedback has been from audience members that when they see the first, the first image, in the film is, it starts in black. Heather says, we were omniscient in people's lives, and then we see, this black and white footage of a bomb, being dropped, and then later on, you see these aerials, and a lot of them in the West, the Bay Area. We have a lot of aerial footage in the Bay Area and New York as well, in different places. And yeah, I think it is still, for me, when I see it, it strikes me how people don't even notice that they are being watched from above, and they're just going about their lives and crossing the street and and walking outside, but they have it's really intrusive to have this eye in the sky, the surveillance above you, and of course where the drones can fly, they can also be armed.
Yeah. One of the things I've noticed in this screening, because I've seen the film maybe 5 times, but I hadn't noticed this before, was the first shot we get is the ceiling fan above Heather in the diner. Mm-hmm. And then when we go to Afghanistan, we again get a shot of a ceiling fan. So there's also this really interesting visual and sonic bridge between the domestic space and the international space.
Yeah, and the ceiling fan actually for me has more meaning too. When I first met Heather and she was telling me about her war experiences and her trauma, it really reminded the way we wage war has changed dramatically. You don't even have to go into a war zone anymore. You can be in complete safety in a container, in a base in California, and wage a war halfway across the world. It's crazy when you really think about it. But it's what I saw in Heather and others is that however, even though the type of warfare, the methods of war have changed so dramatically, the impact it has on her and others, is in a way similar to, people who have been, in combat. At least, at my screenings, combat veterans have told me, yes, they have waged a different type of war, and their experience was very, very different than mine, but what they are going through is so similar to what I've been going through. So when I first heard Heather's description, it reminded me of veterans, veteran stories from the Vietnam War even, and I had to think about Apocalypse Now, and the first scene in Apocalypse Now, in his bedroom and a ceiling fan, it reminded Martin Sheen of the helicopters, and it's I just saw these parallels, and I'm kind of referencing this film in there because yes, warfare has changed, but it's still the act of killing is still impacting the people who participate in it so profoundly.
Well, while we're talking about that, let's also think then about the sounds of the ceiling fan and the sounds of the helicopter. And again, in Afghanistan, we hear the helicopter fly overhead, and we see the reactions of the people testifying and how viscerally they're affected by that sound. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the sound design of the film, because that is such a striking element and it augments the visuals so powerfully.
Yeah, I think a sound in documentary film is really important, because that's where the emotion comes from. You feel it, and I wanted to have these visceral sounds because I really don't have a lot of music vocabulary, but my composer is really good in translating my language, so I would always describe feelings and emotions to her. When I asked her about told her about scenes, I said you should feel it on your spine, because that's what I felt when I landed in Afghanistan, and the airport in Kabul is a military airport as well, and and sometimes the planes are being shot at, and so the moment you're landing, you feel this tension, and you feel it in the back of your, you just feel it on your spine, and throughout our filming there, I felt it, and that's kind of the feeling I wanted to get across, and I think it comes a lot from the sounds. And we, so my composer, she not just composed the entire music, but every sound in this film has been naturally recorded. She records natural sound, she modifies and builds her own instruments, and also uses sounds that I had recorded or found somewhere. For example, we have one sound in the film. It's the recording of an Israeli drone in Palestinian territories,
Wow.
and 2 people have actually heard the sound in the film without even knowing about it. They heard the sound of a drone, and then we have the sound of the helicopters, and this kind of up and down. It's like this sound. The ceiling fan also makes, and these are. For me, this repetition of these sounds just evokes different emotions and feelings, and it's this feeling of something that's above you, that's threatening. And yes, I really wanted to get that across, because that's what we witnessed in Afghanistan, these helicopters above our heads all the time during the interviews. And of course the drones, everyone knows what a drone is in Afghanistan.
Yeah. So the first time I watched this film was on my laptop, and then I watched it multiple times on Netflix, on my television, but watching it and hearing it in the theater with so many other people, it was a completely different experience. It felt so much more immersive and powerful. So I'm really glad I had that opportunity to do that. And then in terms of aesthetics and visuals, also absences I wanted to think about. Were there things that you would have liked to have filmed, given more money or time or access? Are there things that logistically just weren't possible that you think would have been useful or important?
I've never had that question before. I don't think so.
Good.
And not really. I mean, well, we tried to get access to military bases.
Right.
And we actually tried it throughout the entire production. So we did requests to the drone bases. They have led very selected media on bases before. So based on that, we tried to get access, but we were not even denied, but for the longest time, but they would just not get back to us, or postpone and postpone for months and months and months. So we had to make fixed deadlines. Because they are very smart in not writing back a no or a response, but just not responding essentially. And so we would have liked to have more access and have official interviews as well, but we were not allowed on any of these bases. It's fair. I filmed on military bases before, so I'm sure they've done all the background checks on me, but we were not let in. So that would have been interesting, I think, to have that type of access. And then we did FOIA requests, and we tried to. The reenactment is based on the radio traffic transcript of real drone traffic, the radio traffic of a drone crew, and we tried to get at least the sound or the video, but it was denied to us.
Yeah, I've written about Guantanamo Bay and the access to documentarians and journalists, so it doesn't surprise me to hear this. It's very, very limited, and then even if you are granted access, they screen everything, delete anything that doesn't meet regulations, and the guidelines are very arbitrary, so it's very easy to say this does or doesn't meet the standards.
Yeah, so that's not really access either.
Exactly.
If you have, and I've done it before too, where I had 3 PR people, after trying for a year to get, on Ramstein, the base in Ramstein, they wouldn't let us film anything essentially. So it's, that's not really access either.
Exactly. You can say you have transparency, but what kind of transparency, what kind of access is it if it's so limited that it's just, access in name only? So shifting gears again, I wanted to then think about the different kinds of audiences that have screened this film. I know that you've shown it at hacker conventions, for example. So what are some of the different responses you've gotten from the audiences that you've screened this film in front of?
Yeah, it's at the hacker convention, it was a very, very interesting short notice invitation that I received to speak, and it was actually a big convention. It was the CCC in Germany, so there were 12,000 people, and where I was invited to introduce the film, and then we showed it at midnight in front of a 200 people audience. And my initial expectation was that it's not going to connect with all these young tech guys, hackers, because they it's not technical enough for them. But surprisingly, they they really loved the film. They gave standing ovations, and we did a 3-hour Q&A afterwards until 4 a.m. in the morning. And
we don't have time to do that today, unfortunately, sorry.
But I really realized that they were so happy that we were tackling the subject and we were really breaking this down, because they knew a lot what was going on, and they really understood the whole magnitude. And that's what I tried to explain earlier, the whole surveillance system, the things that are connected to it, what you can do with it. You just have to kind of look into the future already. I'm really, what I'm curious about is the degree of automation that's happening already with algorithms, for example, and like in the how do you find and identify certain targets, and how big is the automation as part of that already. And then the next steps, like the research is going toward swarm technologies, interacting swarm technologies, autonomous drones. You have semi-autonomous tanks already, and all of these weapons work, are being plugged into this surveillance system that can suck up data from everything. And look at our cars nowadays, they're all connected to the internet. Our fridges, TVs, all this new technology. So we can buy these devices, I don't know what they call it, you put in your house and like tell them to switch on your lights and off your light, but they listen to you. And our cell phones, of course, they listen to all our conversation, and it's so intrusive, and just the magnitude of that, the control that you have when you collect and store all of this data. I mean, just look at the Stasi, what they were able to do with the technologies that were existed back then.
Yeah, so it makes sense hackers would respond to this thinking so much about whistleblowing, about freedom of information. Those are very similar values to what they espouse. And then has there been pushback from any kind of audience member, any particular critiques that have been raised?
I expected more.
Okay.
I think, to a certain extent, of course, people who go to these screenings might be a little bit self-selected already. Right. So I'm trying to think. We've had a pretty big military veteran audience, and so the film was shown on PBS. ITVS, the independent television service, was our largest funder, and I'm very thankful they got on board very, very early. And Independent Lens actually sponsored a 75 city community screening tour, in-person screenings. We have an educational guide. Actually, we have 2 educational guides that go with the film. So if you're interested, nationalbirdfilm.com has a Get Involved section, and it has these guides with more background information online. And so we screened the film in like Colorado Springs. I went there, Nebraska. We really all over the coast, of course. I went to St. Louis, and there was an interesting audience. A lot of veterans, and actually combat and war veterans as well. But they really, especially in Colorado Springs, there was a big military audience, and it was really one of the best discussions I've had, because they started sharing their own experiences of trauma, and that's where I met this one infantryman who he had been deployed, I think, 36 months in combat, and he stood up after screening. He said, "I can really identify with Heather." And I thought it was really remarkable, because of course there are people, mainly the most criticism that I've seen is online by, I don't know if usually it's anonymous, you don't know if they're military enthusiasts, or real
or trolls.
Or trolls, or maybe also service members or veterans, as well. But there are some people who say, oh, why are these people traumatized? They have not seen combat. But there are studies now out about post-traumatic stress disorder and also moral injury that it's often visually triggered. And then also imagine, Heather, these imagery analysts are between 18 and 25, and they have to make these very far-reaching calls. Is this person a terrorist, or is this person a civilian? And at that age, to make a call like that would can eventually lead to a killing of even a group of people, is a very difficult decision. And I can really, I understand, Heather, when, things, replay in your mind and you question yourself, have I been doing the right decision? Because you've seen some of the imagery. And I'm not sure if I could, I don't think you can tell if a person is 14 years old or 16 years old. So,
and if they're 16 years old, that still doesn't mean that they deserve to be killed.
Military age male.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then we also hear Heather saying, well, I said this, but nobody listened to me. And they just spoke to someone else and I couldn't.
Yeah, there's a conflict between the ranks. Like imagery analysts are usually lower ranking people, that pilots and sensor operators are higher ranking, often officers. So you have that tension as well. So a lot of that kind of comes out in this reenactment, I think. This, the problems of having, groups of people at different locations, miscommunication that arises out of that. So I think this technology really has to be discussed, and these flaws have to be discussed. And, I think it has really, technology has, in this instant, has really, in my mind, has outpaced, our laws and rules and regulations and even our moral standards to a certain extent.
Absolutely.
And we have to catch up, as a society.
And then, were any of the participants able to see the film? And if so, what were their responses?
We did I did a safe environment screening with the subjects, the ones who could come, 2 days before the world premiere, the Berlin Film Festival. And we had their attorney present, and some friends as well, some support and family, and for me that was, of course, a very nerve-wracking moment, because they had not seen anything. I really wanted to make this production as clean as possible, so they didn't have any influence, except, I did, fact checking with them. I would ask them, questions throughout, and I fact checked everything myself. But yeah, it's, I really wanted to be journalistically clean, but I did a safe environment screening because it is an impactful film. And Heather was actually, one of the moments where she was most emotional was during the reenactment, because she said it was so real and it brought back so many memories. And it's, for her to see herself, and she has been really doing very, very well since, the film has come out. She's back in school. She has 1 year left for her bachelor's degree. And she's still working with a therapist, and so the counseling has been extremely good for her. So she's doing well, and Lisa has really dedicated her life to education. So she has toured with the film throughout the world, pretty much, and is like, whoever wants to talk to her, I think she's very open and willing to discuss her experiences and her insight into drone warfare. So she has really transformed, the experience of being part of the film to, her outreach and her life's dedication. She's actually also back in school and studying politics and history because she wants to become an educator on these issues. And Daniel that's always a difficult part, because it really, like, the ending of the film, that his current location is unknown, has not changed. I have heard very recently that he's well, so that makes me extremely happy. So yeah, but it's, as you can imagine, to have this over your head, and we still, till this point, we don't know. These investigations can go on, it could be closed for they don't tell you. And it's really, I don't think you should do that to people, to leave them in this constant situation of fear, and you don't even know what's going on. So it's very disturbing.
Absolutely.
Any questions?
A few more. So, we constantly see Obama throughout the film, and then you or the participants present evidence that contradicts his statements. But, we've moved forward since the film's been made, so I'm curious, if you would say that the state of drone warfare has changed since the making of the film, and if so, how, and then also where you see it going from here.
Well, I mean, everything we've been hearing, during the Trump presidency is that he is completely embracing the drone program, and with like the first strikes, in the first weeks of his presidency in Yemen, I've heard from multiple sources that drones were involved in these, strikes that have gone wrong as well. And then he's been debating to, Obama at the end of his presidency was putting a few more restrictions on the program, especially regarding CIA drone strikes, and President Trump has been, announcing already to, wanting to move in the other directions again, and giving the CIA power back again, which is even less transparent than the military drone strikes. And he also recently announced that there has been pressure from the weapons manufacturing industry that they want to sell more drones abroad. And so, there has been regulation on that, but the US government is actually planning, has been announced that they want to deregulate drone sales abroad as well. So, I mean, it's very clear this weapon is not going to go away, and it's quite the opposite. It's going to proliferate. So I think it's really important, for people to inform themselves and also become active, because all these weapons, they always come back too. So and I think I understand why drones are being used from a military strategic perspective, because you're not putting troops in physical harm's way. What really has to be looked at and studied is the psychological harm that is, it's very clear that it exists for pilots as well. A lot of pilots leave their positions, and then of course as a military strategy, is it increasing or reducing terror? Are drone strikes really killing more, less civilians? Some research points to the opposite too. And then the impact on the societies that, where drones are, where children are afraid of the sky, what impact does that have, even on our safety?
So for those people in the audience or who are watching this later on UCTV, what would you say in terms of how we can make an impact?
I mean, I'm not an activist. I'm a journalist, and actually that's what I told my my characters at the beginning, of our production as well, or before we started shooting, because you saw Daniel is a big activist, and I said to all of them, I want this to be a journalistic film. So I really, I purposefully didn't, I don't have a narration in the film, because I didn't want to tell people what to think. Mm-hmm. So, I wanted to give as much information as possible and have, people really come to their own conclusions and thoughts about it. So, because there have been so many screenings where people actually have gone, I was like, how can we get involved? What can we do? Right. Especially in California, literally we've had screenings in the Bay Area. It's like, what can we do? Right. And at first I said, it's like, I don't know, you're voters, you can vote, you can protest, it's a free society. But then we actually came, we started to, we made this Get Involved page. So I think, we have more information on the website about whistleblowers and support for whistleblowers, because I think that's very important. Journalists and filmmakers cannot work without whistleblowers. And, by definition, whistleblowers expose waste, fraud, abuse, illegal, criminal activity. It's, there's a big distinction to, spies and leakers, for profit. A whistleblower is someone who does, who blows the whistle for the public good. And they really need support, because the legal costs are very high. There's the Courage Foundation, there's Whisper organization. Jesselyn Radek, who's in the film, she works pro bono and defends all these whistleblowers. So that's very important. And then a lot of people are very interested about the prosthetics hospital in Afghanistan. We have a link to that hospital. It's it's a hospital run by the Red Cross, and it's fantastic. I have to say, they have most of the doctors who work there actually also have lost limbs, and they are just really working with like all of their hearts and so much passion, and they have a women's part in the hospital. They provide prosthetics for free to children and men and women, and and then we have more information about just drone warfare. So I think that's the first step, to educate yourself, and then yes, we all have a voice. This is a democratic society, and yes, I think our society has to catch up and really decide, is this the type of warfare that we want in the future.
And then could you tell us about what project you're working on next? If you can, maybe you can't.
Yeah, I am. I actually got the idea from these screenings, that I'm working on a second part. This is actually part of a trilogy, and it's when I first released National Bird, audience members came up to me and said, "So, like, what's the second part?" And I said, "What second part?" I hadn't thought about it at the end, and he said, "This is like the opening to something." And then I started realizing it myself, because the stories don't end, right? This film really, it's a start to a lot of things that are happening. So I am working on the second part now, which is it's with new subjects, new protagonists, and it's not about drones, but it's about surveillance, and it connects to this. It builds on this film. That's as much as I can say now.
Okay, but we'll stay tuned for. Maybe in a few years it should come out.
Please do. Yes, it's always depending on funding. So if there are any funders in the audience,
I see a lot of funders.
Documentary film funding is very, very tough. There's really there's not enough money in the market. There are so many important projects out there, and I think documentarians have been taking over a lot of the investigative journalism work. And yeah, it's we are doing grant writing right now, but I know a lot of my friends are they all have great important projects. So it's and the grants are very, very small. So if I get the funding together, I think I can release in early 2019. We can produce within a year, but it really depends on funding.
It sounds a lot like being an academic, actually.
Yes.
And then my final question, so you said you didn't really want to be didactic or drive home a particular message, but is there one thing you would like audiences to leave thinking about, or to carry with them?
Well, I really hope this is a film that makes people reflect and think, and that it stays with you. And I personally, when I see it, I still especially when I hear the subjects in Afghanistan share their stories, I think from my director of photography and me, it was really impactful, same as for Lisa, you saw at the end, because it's the people there, and I know all their names. We decided not to publish their names because just to give them just a small layer of protection, and they were okay with showing their faces, and they actually thanked us for being able to share their stories. That was the first thing. They traveled to us 3 days and 3 nights, and I was very concerned about that, because it's a dangerous trip. We could have never traveled out there. It would have been far too dangerous. And the first thing they said, thank you for asking us for our side of the story. They didn't have an opportunity to share their stories, and I think that also it made me think about like our privilege of being able to go out and speak out, speak our opinion, have a free press. That's a huge value when something happens to you and you are able to make it public, and we should really like fight and work to preserve that, because I do believe that it is under threat, and that's one thing that I think we should all do in our small circles, because for me this film, it started as a film about drones, but it also became a film about the cost of whistleblowing, the courage of whistleblowers, and freedom of speech, freedom of the press, what we, government transparency, how important it is. And we, unfortunately, we really have to fight for it, because I don't think, there's a reason to make this program so secret and make it so difficult, for people to get information about collateral damage, to get help for veterans. All of that is very worrisome.
We're going to open it up to questions from the audience at this point.
I feel like everybody can be a courageous artist if you're inspired in the right way. And so my first question is, what inspires you to be courageous in your art?
What inspires me to be courageous? I mean, I think my mom would now say I've always been very rebellious. But I was born in Malaysia. I grew up in Germany. And I mean, Germany has a very problematic history, and of course, we had the Third Reich, but then also East Germany and the Stasi. I studied that, and and I just see a lot of parallels to today now, and that's something that I think we should really resist. It's and for me, making these films and yes, I tackle risky subjects. It's really my area of interest, and I know, and my mom is always like, can't you do something nice, like a music documentary, or something like that? But it's not really what interests me, and I'm also a member of the society, and I really think this is like, what other option do we have? Should we just stand by and watch how our rights are being taken away? I mean, I think the only option that we have is to do something. Otherwise, it just gets worse, and it will. If you don't do anything, it's going to increase the risk for everyone if you don't push back as early as possible. And data can be used against people in so many ways, from blackmailing to just this information collection. That really, I think self-censorship is a really big concern. So I don't know if you have to be born courageous. I think it helps to that we encourage each other, make it a point, and also see other courageous people. When I see the people in Afghanistan, it inspires me. When I see the whistleblowers, because they, I think courage is contagious too. When you see other people, standing up, we see the two also with the sexual harassment, reporting right now, and it's I think seeing courage is really helpful and encourage other people.
But would you just talk a little bit more about some of the sounds that you used in a kind of a poetic and echoing and repetitive way?
I'm so glad about this question because I actually rarely get to talk about the filmmaking, because at most screenings, people, all they want to talk about is the content. And that of course is very important, but as a filmmaker, of course, this is a very hard political subject, but I also wanted to make a film, and an artistic film, and so yes, we paid a lot of attention. I paid a lot of attention to the sound and the soundscape, and the images. I mean, there are a lot of. I'm referencing multiple other films in this films through sound, through images. And with the sound, I think my composer's, she's extraordinarily talented. And interestingly enough, I found out there are not a lot of female film composers. So Insa Rudolph, she's actually a trained jazz vocalist as well, and you hear her voice, but I think she's a fabulous composer. And so a lot of it is like our sound design, our composition is really intertwined. There was actually a big debate between the composers, wait, what is the sound designer doing? And then the sound is what is the composer doing? So we actually had to all work together, and I had to make sure that no one felt excluded, because it was their area, territory and so on. And Yeah, so it really is immersed. So there are a lot of sound. There's not a real sort of a bomb sound that, I don't know. Are you talking about the driving when she, like the night shot in the dark when she's driving, or
When she's going to the VA, is that right?
Yes, when she's going to the VA.
Okay, when she's going
It's in the daytime.
Yeah, that's yeah. So there, no, we never made like I think that wouldn't have not been subtle enough to make a bomb sound. But we have some sounds that resemble, like there's a lot of there are sounds in there that have sort of a heartbeat. That's what you sometimes hear, especially when Heather writes a Guardian article. There's a sound, and I have to say, I don't know always how my composer creates every single sound, because she does it so, like, nothing comes out of a computer. Everything is naturally created. So, like, the first sound in a film, there's almost like a breathing sound. She had a cello player, and they wrapped aluminum foil around the strings, and then he played across the aluminum foil. Like she really does very interesting things to create the sounds that she has in her head, and so yeah, and we wanted the sound to be very subtle and very organic, so that it's more sometimes more like sounds than like a real composition. And as I said, in one area we actually have the sound of a drone. We have the sound of a ceiling fan that's kind of coming up in the soundscape. And we actually mixed the film Dolby Surround, which is also pretty unusual for a documentary film. But I think it really creates more of an effect, especially when you're in Afghanistan. You hear the helicopter above you, and so yeah, I really wanted that you can feel it more. And then also what we used as and often in films you see when there are emotional moments that there's like a lot of sound, a lot of addition. We actually went the other route. I don't know if you noticed, when in the most emotional moments we actually completely cut off the music. And like when Heather starts getting emotional, she always ends in silence. So we used silence a lot in the film as well. So the mix between sounds, music, and silence. So these are kind of the elements that we had, and so yeah, we and also I think what you heard in this car, when she's in the car, what we did too is we often, the natural sound, we reduced it. So when Heather's in traffic, and then the cars are driving past her, instead of having zzzz, it's like whoosh, whoosh. So we went a little bit into like what I discussed with the sound designer and the mixers, that we almost did more, a little bit of a less natural sound, maybe more of a fiction film where the sounds would be really reduced to certain sound elements that would represent the car. And it's not like the real traffic sound, but it would be the representation of a car. I had to think about all these different things, but yes, we spent a lot of time in sound. I think we did 3 weeks of sound mixing and work with the sound designer. I worked very closely with the sound designer. I had my composer come in. We all worked together. We would send things back and forth, from the sound design. She would incorporate that back into her music. So that's why it's really intertwined. Yeah, it was really important to us.
Thank you to all of you for being engaged, being thoughtful, and hopefully, even though Sonia didn't say it herself, we'll become active and continue to speak out and think about these issues, because they're only going to continue to become more and more and more disturbingly relevant. So thank you very much to our guest, director and producer of National Birds, Sonia Kennebeck. And thank you again to all of you.